We need to talk about self-deportation. With the rise of aggressive immigration policies and mass deportation tactics that we're seeing in the US, many undocumented people are turning to self-deportation. But what does this term mean? Where did it originate? And how is it being weaponized to create harmful narratives of our community?
We know that immigration is a very politicized and divisive topic across the US. There are millions of immigrants, many of which are undocumented. And when you look at different ways to address this growing population of undocumented folks, there are two extremes. We have either the removal of all undocumented folks or total amnesty and a subsequent pathway towards citizenship. But we know that neither are a realistic option for the US government or an option that all political parties can come to a consensus on. And this is where we see the emergence of something called attrition through enforcement, which is a deliberate strategy designed to increase the risk and cost of remaining in the US without a legal status. Measures such as mandatory use of e-verify system, increased detention during removal proceedings, stricter cooperation between agencies, and the significant increases in immigration enforcement resources have created an environment where the consequence of staying in the US without a status becomes so severe that undocumented folks are choosing to leave. So then this outcome of self-deportation emerges where self-deportation is the outcome of attrition through enforcement. In this notion, by limiting employment opportunities and imposing significant legal and personal risk, the idea is that undocumented individuals will choose to leave the country voluntarily. In other words, attrition through enforcement is aimed at pushing people towards self-deportation by making the cost of staying too high. But we need to understand a few things about self deportation, beginning with the fact that it is not a formal legal term, contrary to popular belief. As I talked about in the last slide, it emerged as a political and policy phrase to describe the idea that undocumented immigrants would leave the US voluntarily if life was made difficult for them. The term gained mainstream political use in the 1990s and 2000s when anti immigration advocates promoted policies that would make it harder for undocumented immigrants to live and work in the US, hoping they would self deport rather than face removal. It was notably used during the 2012 US presidential campaign by Mitt Romney, who advocated for policies that would encourage immigrants to self deport. He argued that if people could not work in the US, they would self deport to somewhere where they could work. But as we have started to connect the puzzle pieces, this strategy has extended far beyond denying authorization to work and entered the space of denying basic human rights. Following the results of the last presidential election, immigration policies of the current administration, and mass deportation tactics, the use of this term is rapidly growing as many immigrants are now considering and choosing to leave the United States. But here's why we need to be aware of the framing and the language we use to describe the people who self deport. For those undocumented folks who have left the US or are currently thinking of leaving the US, they know that the term self deportation carries a lot of emotional weight. And rightfully so, many people find this term offensive or demeaning because it diminishes the life changing decision to leave the US. For many, the US is the only home they've ever known or spent the majority of their life there. For some, the US is home, and having to leave your home is devastating and very emotional. To some, the term self deportation might even suggest that the decision to leave is a mark of failure or shame because of the heavy anti immigrant rhetoric that undocumented folks have with this notion that they don't belong here. This term can also imply that self deporting was forced on a person and not that the person had the autonomy to make their own decision based on what was best for them and their long term goals. The phrase can imply that someone is forced out of the country, even when the decision is made independently. It often frames the individual as having been broken by the system, which is not the full story. And lastly, the term self deportation has been weaponized and is used as a result of a larger tactic, as I explained at the beginning of this video. The term can have a very stigmatizing language that perpetuates negative images, implying that undocumented people that are leaving or have left did something wrong, feeding into this criminal narrative. We have seen time and time again in public policy discussions how self deportation is sometimes used in a way that reinforces stereotypes about undocumented immigrants. It contributes to the narrative that blames undocumented folks for their circumstances rather than addressing systemic issues. And many US politicians have gone above and beyond in ingraining this into the minds of many Americans. With this particular term, you need to understand that self deportation and voluntary departure are very different and they cannot be used interchangeably. This slide compares self deportation and voluntary departure. Self deportation is an informal, self initiated decision to leave the country without following any legal process, regulation, or legal recognition, whereas voluntary departure is an official legal process with specific guidelines set by immigration authorities. The process of self-deportation is an ad hoc decision where the individual decides when and how to leave with no paperwork or documentation involved. Voluntary departure requires filling certain criteria and documentation to meet certain eligibility criteria. Self-deportation may negatively affect future immigration options due to the lack of proper documentation. In these cases, the individual might face bars for reentry, whereas voluntary departure generally results in fewer long-term penalties compared to forced deportation through a removal order. It is a controlled process, though it can still impact future options. With that said, it's really important to note that if you're not already in removal proceedings, meaning you're facing a deportation order, the formal process of voluntary departure does not apply to your situation. Voluntary departure is a legal mechanism specifically designed for those already in removal proceedings, which allows individuals to leave the US under court supervision. So, what are some terms that the immigrant community is starting to adopt to replace the term self deportation? What are some of the alternative terms that you've heard about in the community? I'd be really interested to know. Please let me know in the comments. But some of the ones that I've heard are voluntary exit, self initiated departure, self removed, choosing to leave, and even returning home. All of the people that have followed my journey through social media for the last 3 years of my life know me as the girl who self deported and immigrated to Canada. Self deported is in my name on TikTok. I chose to adopt the term self deported to reclaim my narrative and assert my agency in a system that has tried to define me solely based on my legal status. Despite the challenges that my status presented, I defied those odds through determination and unwavering perseverance. I lived in the United States for 19 years and as an undocumented individual, and I accomplished things that us undocumented folk weren't supposed to. Man, the US really tried to break me during those 19 years, but all their efforts only made me stronger and more determined. Even when DACA excluded me, I forged my own path. So even after self deporting, I refuse to be defined by the labels or the narrative that the US has created for people like me. By forcing me out, they didn't win. They didn't make my life worse. I am not a criminal. I did not steal anyone's place. I earned every opportunity I had through my own dedication, sacrifice, and incredible resilience. By embracing the term self deported, I show that despite my status, I have entered spaces and accomplished things that racist and xenophobic Americans have tirelessly tried to exclude me from. And the joke's on them. I made the decision to leave, and I am much better off now that I've left. In this chapter of my life, the US was honestly a stepping stone, and it was not my end all be all. I went from surviving when I was there to now living. So I use my social media platforms as a voice to really carry my commitment to empower the undocumented community by sharing that the US does not have to be your end goal if you don't want it to be. We matter, we are valuable, and we are strong. We are powerful people who can rebuild in a country that values us or choose to stay and fight for change. There is absolutely nothing wrong with self deporting. For all of you folks thinking of self deporting or know of those who are choosing to leave, just be mindful and aware of the way that they want to describe their journey. For them, self deportation might not be the way that they want to refer to it. For others, it might be. Just keep that in mind.
I hope you found this video helpful. I'm sending you a very big hug. Please stay safe and protect your mental health. I will see you in the next video.